My name is Liam, and I am 32 years old. Just a few weeks ago, the company that my father and I poured our blood, sweat, and tears into, the very legacy he entrusted to me on his deathbed, was ripped from my hands by my own mother and sister. They didn't just fire me, they tried to erase me. My sister Chloe stood in the lobby of the building I practically built, a smug grin plastered on her face, and laughed. She laughed as I carried a box with the few personal items I was allowed to take from my office. "I'm the vice president now, Liam," she sneered, her voice dripping with a venom I never knew she possessed. "You're nothing." Her words were meant to be the final nail in my coffin, the final twist of the knife. She thought she had won. She thought I was broken, a discarded relic of a past she was now in control of. What she didn't know was that in that moment of profound betrayal and searing pain, she wasn't ending my story. She was igniting a fire within me, a resolve forged in the crucible of her cruelty. She couldn't have possibly imagined that her moment of triumph would be so fleeting. She couldn't have known that her face, so full of arrogant victory, would look so very different when I walked back into that boardroom and bought the entire company right out from under her. If you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you, who were supposed to protect you, then you need to hear this story. Make sure you like and subscribe, because you're about to witness how the deepest betrayals can fuel the most satisfying comebacks. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about justice, about reclaiming a legacy, and about showing those who tried to bury you that they gravely underestimated your strength. The story of Innovate Dynamics didn't begin in a sterile boardroom. It began in our family garage. I was 15, all gangly limbs and boundless energy, and my father, Richard, was my hero. He was an engineer, a brilliant one, with a mind that saw solutions where others only saw problems. He had spent 20 years working for a massive, soulless tech conglomerate that chewed up good ideas and spat out mediocre products. He had a dream, a vision for a company that valued genuine innovation and the people who created it. He wanted to build something that mattered, something that would last. I remember the day he came home, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration in his eyes, and told my mother he had quit his job. He had cashed out his modest 401k, taken out a second mortgage on our house, and was starting his own company. My mother was supportive then, or at least she appeared to be. Chloe, who was only 10 at the time, was too young to understand the magnitude of the risk he was taking. But I understood. I saw the passion in his eyes, and I was hooked. That garage became my school, my playground, and my temple. After my regular school day ended, I would rush home to work alongside him. He taught me how to solder a circuit board, how to write my first lines of code, how to read a schematic. He didn't just teach me the technical skills, he taught me the philosophy that would become the bedrock of Innovate Dynamics. "Integrity, Liam," he'd say, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "It's the one component you can't buy. You have to build it into everything you do. Our products, our relationships with clients, how we treat our employees. It all starts with integrity." We worked for 2 years in that garage, fueled by cheap pizza and an unshakable belief in what we were doing. Our first breakthrough was a proprietary sensor technology that was more accurate and energy efficient than anything on the market. That single invention was our ticket out of the garage and into a small rented office space. I finished high school and went straight to college, studying business and engineering. Every paper I wrote, every project I undertook was with the singular goal of returning to help my father run the company. He never pushed me. He never had to. We were partners, co-conspirators in a dream. When I graduated, he didn't just give me a job. He gave me the title of Chief Operating Officer. He trusted me implicitly, not just because I was his son, but because he had seen my dedication firsthand. He knew I shared his vision and his values. Together, we grew Innovate Dynamics from a small startup into a respected mid-sized tech firm with over 200 employees. We were known for our cutting-edge products and our incredible company culture. We weren't just a company, we were a community. My father knew every employee by name, knew about their families, their struggles, their triumphs, and he taught me to do the same. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, it felt like the world had been knocked off its axis. He fought hard, as he always did, but it was a battle even his brilliant mind couldn't engineer a solution for. In his final months, we spent less time in the boardroom and more time on the back porch talking about the future. He made me promise that I would protect the company, that I would never let the corporate vultures we'd fought so hard to differentiate ourselves from sink their talons into our creation. "It's yours now, Liam," he whispered, his hand frail in mine. "Protect our people. Protect our legacy." I promised him I would. I became CEO after his passing, and I poured my grief into my work, determined to make him proud. The company thrived. We secured our biggest contracts to date, our stock price soared, and our future seemed brighter than ever. I felt his presence in every decision I made, his principles guiding my every action. I thought my family shared in that pride. I was so devastatingly, catastrophically wrong. The foundation of our shared dream had been compromised by a rot I was too blind to see, a rot that festered in my own home, nurtured by my mother and personified by my sister, Chloe. It's painful to look back and see the signs that I missed, the little red flags that, in my grief and focus, I dismissed as insignificant. After my father passed, my mother, who had previously shown only a passing interest in the business, began to take a much more active role. She had inherited my father's controlling shares, a fact that seemed a mere formality at the time. I was the CEO, his chosen successor, and I never imagined she would use that power as a weapon against me. Her interest began as suggestions. She would call me in the middle of the day to ask about minor operational details or forward articles about management strategies she'd read online. I saw it as her way of staying connected to my father's legacy, a way of processing her own grief. I was patient, explaining the intricacies she didn't understand, reassuring her that everything was under control. But her focus soon narrowed to one specific subject: Chloe. My sister had never shown the slightest aptitude or interest in the technical side of the business. While I was spending my teenage years learning to code in the garage, she was focused on cheerleading and social status. She went to college and earned a degree in communications, and when she graduated, my father, in a moment of familial obligation I now see as a critical mistake, gave her a job in the marketing department. She was adequate at best. She could organize a trade show booth and approve ad copy, but she lacked any deep understanding of our products or the industry. She saw her job not as a career, but as a birthright, a comfortable perch from which to enjoy the fruits of my father's and my labor. Under my leadership, her mediocrity became more apparent. I expected results and accountability from everyone, including her. This did not sit well with Chloe or with my mother. "You're too hard on her, Liam," my mother would say after Chloe would come home complaining about a deadline or a project I had asked her to revise. "She's your sister. This is a family business." "It's a business first, Mom," I would reply, trying to remain patient. "And it succeeds because we have the best people in the right roles." Nepotism is poison. My words would fall on deaf ears. In their eyes, my commitment to meritocracy was a betrayal of family. They saw my professional standards as a personal attack on Chloe. The golden child dynamic, which had always been present in our family in subtle ways, began to metastasize. Chloe could do no wrong. Her minor accomplishments were celebrated as genius, and her frequent failures were always someone else's fault, usually mine. The first major crack in the facade appeared about a year after my father's death. We were on the verge of landing a massive contract with a German automotive company. It was a game changer, worth tens of millions. The final presentation was critical. Chloe's department was responsible for preparing the marketing collateral and the presentation deck. I gave her clear instructions, a detailed brief, and a firm deadline. The night before the meeting, she sent me the final presentation. It was a disaster. It was riddled with typos, the technical specifications were inaccurate, and the design looked like something a high school student would create. It was completely unacceptable. I called her immediately, my voice tight with controlled panic. "Chloe, what is this? This is unusable. The meeting is in 10 hours. Her response was a sigh of exasperation. "Oh, relax, Liam. It's fine. You're such a perfectionist." I spent the entire night, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, rebuilding the presentation from scratch with two of our lead engineers. We finished just as the sun was rising. I walked into the presentation exhausted but prepared. We won the contract. My relief was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a cold dread when I returned to the office. I called Chloe into my office to discuss what had happened, to explain the severity of her failure. Before I could say a word, my mother stormed in, her face a mask of fury. She had already been briefed by Chloe, who had of course painted herself as the victim. "How dare you humiliate your sister like that?" my mother yelled. "She told me you tore her work apart in front of everyone." "That's not what happened," I said, stunned. "Her work was not up to standard." "It would have cost us the biggest deal in this company's history. I fixed it." "He's always like this," Chloe chimed in, tears welling up in her eyes. It was a performance, and a convincing one. "He put so much pressure on me, it's impossible to succeed." My mother put her arm around Chloe, glaring at me. "Your father wanted this to be a family company, a place where his children could work together. He would be so disappointed to see you treating your sister this way. She's trying her best, and all you do is criticize her." It was then that I realized the terrifying truth. The reality of the situation didn't matter. The facts were irrelevant. In their shared narrative, I was the villain, the cold-hearted brother and son who was trying to push the delicate, well-meaning Chloe out of her rightful place. I was no longer dealing with logic, I was dealing with a deeply entrenched delusional worldview. I tried to reason with them, to lay out the business case, the risk she had exposed us to. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. The argument escalated, my voice rising in frustration as I tried to break through their wall of denial. She needs to be held accountable, I insisted. This isn't a social club. My mother's response was chilling. Maybe you're not the right person to be leading this company if you can't see the importance of family, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Your father may have trusted you, but I'm starting to have my doubts. That statement should have been my final warning. It was a direct threat, a clear declaration of her intentions. But even then, I couldn't truly believe my own mother would betray me, would betray my father's memory in such a profound way. I thought it was just an emotional outburst, the culmination of a bad argument. I told them that as long as I was CEO, performance would matter more than last names. I thought I was drawing a line in the sand, defending the company's principles. In reality, I was just giving them the motivation they needed to finalize their conspiracy against me. They left my office that day, united in a new purpose, to get rid of me. The final betrayal, when it came, was executed with a cold, corporate precision that was all the more shocking because it came from my own family. The week after our explosive argument was unnervingly quiet. Chloe avoided me, and my mother didn't return my calls. I foolishly interpreted this silence as a cooling-off period, a chance for tempers to settle. In truth, it was the calm before the storm, the quiet hum of the guillotine being sharpened. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal notification for an emergency board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. The agenda was ominously vague. A discussion regarding the current leadership and future direction of Innovate Dynamics. My blood ran cold. The board consisted of me, my mother, as the majority shareholder, and two long-standing directors who had been friends of my father, a man named George and a woman named Sarah. I immediately called both George and Sarah. Their responses were evasive and uncomfortable. They mumbled something about my mother having raised some serious concerns. They had already been poisoned. My mother had spent the week systematically turning them against me, using a twisted narrative of my supposed recklessness and cruelty towards Chloe. She likely painted my all-night effort to save the German contract not as an act of diligence, but as proof of my inability to delegate, my micromanagement, that was stifling the team. I walked into that boardroom feeling like a man walking to his own execution. The atmosphere was thick with tension. My mother sat at the head of the table, a position she had never taken before, with Chloe at her side. Chloe wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the polished table, a faint, smug smile playing on her lips. George and Sarah looked deeply uncomfortable, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and resolve. Thank you for coming on such short notice, my mother began, her voice devoid of any warmth. I have called this meeting because I can no longer stand by and watch the company my late husband built be driven into the ground by reckless leadership. I was speechless. Driven into the ground? We were having the most profitable year in our history. What are you talking about? I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Our Q3 numbers are record-breaking. Numbers aren't everything, Liam, she retorted, sounding as if she were reciting a rehearsed line. This company was built on a foundation of family and trust, a foundation you have systematically eroded. Your treatment of your sister has been appalling. Your recent high-risk ventures, she was referring to the German deal, the one I saved, have put this entire company in jeopardy. You have become a liability. George and Sarah then chimed in, their words clearly fed to them by my mother. They spoke of staff morale, citing anonymous complaints that I was sure were fabricated or solicited from the few sycophants Chloe had gathered around her. They framed my dedication as obsession, my high standards as tyranny. It was a character assassination, swift and brutal. Every success was twisted into a failure. Every strength was reframed as a weakness. I tried to defend myself, to present the facts, the data, the actual performance reviews, but it was useless. The verdict had already been decided. Therefore, my mother said, her eyes like chips of ice, I am using my position as majority shareholder to call a vote of no confidence in our current CEO. All in favor of removing Liam from his position, effective immediately? She raised her hand. Chloe's hand shot up, her eyes finally meeting mine, glittering with triumph. After a moment of painful hesitation, George and Sarah slowly, reluctantly raised theirs. It was done. In the space of 15 minutes, my entire world had been dismantled. I was out. Furthermore, my mother continued, In light of her deep understanding of the company's marketing needs and her commitment to the family values your father held so dear, I nominate Chloe to the position of Executive Vice President, where she will oversee day-to-day operations. It was a farce. They didn't even bother to name a new CEO, just installed Chloe in a position of power she was laughably unqualified for. The motion passed just as she knew it would. I was so stunned, so utterly gutted that I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, staring at the faces of the people who had just destroyed me. My mother, my sister, my father's trusted friends. After the meeting was adjourned, I went back to my office, the office that was no longer mine, in a daze. Security was already waiting for me, two stoic men, who looked at me with something approaching pity. They were to escort me while I gathered my personal belongings. As I was placing a photo of my father and me in a small cardboard box, Chloe appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. She had that same smug smile on her face. This was her victory lap. "Don't look so sad, big brother," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Mom's right. You weren't a good fit anymore. You're too intense. It's time for a new direction. A better one." I said nothing. I just continued to pack my box. My silence seemed to annoy her, to rob her of the reaction she craved. "It's for the best," she continued, pushing herself off the doorframe and walking towards the window that overlooked the city. "I'll take good care of the company. I've got big plans." I picked up my box and walked towards the door. As I passed her, she turned, her smile widening into a triumphant, ugly grin. That's when she delivered the final blow. "I'm the vice president now, Liam." She laughed, a short, sharp, cruel sound. "You're nothing." I stopped. I turned and looked at her, really looked at her, and in her eyes I saw nothing but a hollow, pathetic need for validation, a desperate desire to feel important by diminishing me. Her words echoed in the sterile hallway as I walked towards the elevator, the security guards trailing behind me like undertakers. Nothing! She thought I was nothing! She thought she had reduced me to a zero, a non-entity. But as the elevator doors closed, cutting off the view of my former life, her words began to transform in my mind. They weren't an epitaph. They were a declaration of war. The hours and days that followed were a blur of numb disbelief and gut-wrenching pain. I went back to my house, the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet, and I set the small box of my former life down on the kitchen table. I didn't unpack it, I couldn't. It felt too final, like a tiny coffin for a life that had been stolen from me. The silence was the worst part. The constant hum of my work life, the emails, the calls, the meetings was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that amplified the screaming in my own head. I kept replaying the boardroom scene, my mother's cold pronouncement, Chloe's triumphant smirk, the averted eyes of George and Sarah. It was a loop of betrayal that played on repeat, each viewing more painful than the last. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were a ghost haunting my own life. Everything I had defined myself by was gone. I was no longer the CEO of Innovate Dynamics. I was no longer the custodian of my father's legacy. I was no longer a son or a brother in any meaningful sense of the words. Chloe's taunt, "You're nothing," echoed in the emptiness. For a few dark days, I started to believe her. I'd wake up and for a fleeting second, I'd think about heading to the office before the crushing weight of reality settled back onto my chest. I wandered around my house like a zombie, ignoring the calls from concerned friends, the texts from former colleagues who were brave enough to reach out. The grief was suffocating. It was more than just losing a job. It felt like I had lost my father all over again. His entire life's work, the tangible manifestation of his dreams, was now in the hands of people who not only didn't understand it, but had actively desecrated his memory to get it. They had used his name and his supposed family values as a cudgel to beat me with, twisting his principles of integrity and trust into a justification for their greed and nepotism. The anger began to burn through the fog of grief. How could my mother do this? How could she look at me, the son who had stood by her, who had worked tirelessly to honor her husband's memory, and cast me aside for Chloe, the daughter who had never shown anything but selfish entitlement? The image of Chloe laughing in the lobby was seared into my brain. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a celebration of my destruction. She was dancing on the grave of my career and my relationship with our father. The injustice of it all was a physical ache, a constant pressure behind my eyes. I felt utterly powerless, a victim of a conspiracy I had been too naive to see coming. I spent a lot of time in my father's old study, a room I had preserved just as he had left it. I'd run my hands over his worn leather chair, look at the photos on his desk of a happier time, of a family that felt real. I was looking for answers, for some kind of solace, but all I found was a deeper sense of loss. The company wasn't just a business to him or to me. It was our bond. It was the language we spoke. Every challenge we overcame, every product we launched was a chapter in our shared story. And now, my mother and sister were gleefully ripping out the pages and setting them on fire. The thought of Chloe as vice president was so absurd, it would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. I could picture it clearly. Her promoting her unqualified friends, spending company money on frivolous perks, making strategic decisions based on whims and ego. She would run it into the ground. The realization hit me not as a comfort, but as a fresh wave of horror. They weren't just content to oust me. They were going to destroy the whole thing. The legacy I had promised my father I would protect was going to be annihilated. That was my rock bottom. Sitting alone in my father's study, surrounded by his memory, feeling the full weight of my failure to keep my promise, I felt hollowed out, defeated. The world had gone gray. But it is often in the deepest darkness that the first spark of light appears, however small. For me, that spark came from a place I least expected it, a dusty, forgotten corner of my father's bookshelf. It was a collection of his old journals, leather-bound notebooks filled with his familiar, sprawling handwriting. I had read them many times before, but that night, I was looking for something different. I wasn't looking for comfort, I was looking for a weapon. I stayed up all night, sifting through years of his thoughts, his designs, his business philosophies. Tucked away in a journal from the very early days, before we even had an office, I found it. It was a section on financing where my father had detailed his anxieties about losing control of his vision. He wrote about his fear of outside investors who wouldn't share his values. And in the margins, he had scribbled the name Arthur Harrison. Met with Arthur Harrison today, the entry read. A shark, but an honorable one. He sees the world in black and white, right and wrong. Turned down his investment offer. He wants too much control. But I respect the man. If you ever need an ally who understands the value of integrity and the art of the fight, he's the one. My heart started beating faster. Arthur Harrison. I knew that name. He was a legend, a titan of the tech industry who had built his own empire in the 90s and was now semi-retired, running a private equity firm that was known for its shrewd and sometimes ruthless acquisitions. He was a corporate raider, but one with a reputation for targeting mismanaged or corrupt companies and restoring them to profitability. My father, the eternal optimist, had seen him as a potential threat, but I, in my current predicament, saw him as a potential savior. It was a long shot, a desperate one, but it was something. It was a thread of hope in a tapestry of despair. Fueled by this newfound glimmer of purpose, I started digging deeper, not just into Harrison, but into the structure of our own company. I pulled up the corporate bylaws that my father and our lawyers had drafted all those years ago. I had co-signed them as COO, but I had never needed to study them in detail. Now, I read every line, every clause, with the intensity of a condemned man searching for a loophole in his sentence. And then I found a second spark. It was a section detailing shareholder rights and buyout provisions. To prevent a hostile takeover from a large corporation, my father had structured the company so that a significant portion of shares were held by early employees and a few trusted angel investors. My mother held the largest single block, the controlling interest, but it wasn't an absolute majority. It was just enough to control the board, provided the other members sided with her. However, the bylaws also contained a very specific and very interesting clause regarding a change of leadership. It stipulated that in the event of the CEO's removal by the board, other shareholders had a 90-day window to purchase shares from any willing party before they could be offered on the open market. It was designed to keep the company in the hands of the family of initial believers. My mother and sister, in their arrogant haste, had likely overlooked or forgotten this clause entirely. They thought their control of the board gave them absolute power, but my father, in his wisdom, had built in a failsafe. It was a small window, a tiny crack in their fortress. But for the first time since I'd been thrown out of my own company, I felt a surge of adrenaline, not from grief, but from possibility. I had a name, and I had a loophole. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp, and utterly determined resolve. They thought I was nothing. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The quest for justice began not with a bang, but with a dial tone. Finding a direct line to a man like Arthur Harrison was a challenge in itself. He was notoriously private, a ghost in the machine of the corporate world he so expertly manipulated. But my father had taught me persistence. I spent 2 days working my old contacts, calling in favors, and navigating the labyrinthine corridors of corporate information. Finally, I got a number for his private equity firm, Harrison Capital. I didn't get through to him, of course. I got his executive assistant, a woman with a voice so polished and impenetrable she could have been a diplomat. I knew I had one shot to make an impression. "My name is Liam Renner," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. My late father was Richard Renner, the founder of Innovate Dynamics. Mr. Harrison met with him about 20 years ago. I need to speak with him about an urgent and time-sensitive investment opportunity regarding my father's company. I used the words investment opportunity deliberately. It was the language men like Harrison understood. It was bait. The assistant's tone thawed by a single, almost imperceptible degree. Mr. Harrison has a great deal of respect for your father's work, she said. I will pass along the message. I knew that could mean anything. It could mean my message would be deleted in the next 5 seconds, but it was the best I could do. I had planted the seed. Now I had to wait. The waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. To keep myself from going insane, I channeled my energy into preparation. I started building a dossier, a comprehensive file on the current state of Innovate Dynamics. I laid out the company's performance under my leadership, the growth charts, the profit margins, the successful product launches. Then, I began to outline what I predicted would happen under Chloe's leadership. I didn't have to guess. I knew her weaknesses. I knew her ego. I projected a sharp decline in R&D investment, an increase in frivolous marketing spend, an exodus of key engineering talent, and an inevitable drop in client satisfaction. I was creating a narrative, a story of value, and its impending destruction. 3 agonizing days later, the call came. It was an unfamiliar number. This is Arthur Harrison. His voice was exactly as I had imagined it. Deep, gravelly, and radiating an aura of absolute authority. There were no pleasantries. Your assistant said you had an opportunity for me. You have 5 minutes. Go. I took a deep breath. This was it. I launched into my pitch, speaking clearly and concisely. I didn't lead with the family drama. I led with the numbers. I told him about Innovate Dynamics' current market position, our proprietary technology, and the massive German automotive contract we had just secured. I painted a picture of a healthy, thriving company with enormous potential. Then, I introduced the conflict. As of this week, I said, the company is being systematically dismantled from the inside. The board, controlled by my mother, who has no business experience, has removed me as CEO and installed my sister, who has a communications degree and a history of incompetence, as executive vice president. They are on a path to run this company, my father's legacy, directly into the ground. I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Your father was a good man, Harrison said, his voice softening slightly. A brilliant engineer, a terrible businessman. He turned down my offer, said he didn't want a partner. He wanted a family. Looks like his family is what ended up costing him. He made a mistake, I said, my voice tight. He was guided by sentiment. I am not. I am guided by the desire for justice and the protection of his legacy. My sister's incompetence isn't just a family problem. It's a market opportunity. The company's value is about to plummet, but its core assets, its IP, and its engineering team are still fundamentally sound. This is a classic case for an acquisition. A rescue. What do you want from me, Mr. Renner? Harrison asked, the business tone returning. I want a partner, I said, echoing his own words from 20 years ago. I know about the 90-day clause in our bylaws. I can't trigger it alone. I don't have the capital to acquire a controlling stake, but you do. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm offering you a deal. Fund me. Help me create a shell corporation to quietly buy up the available shares from our early investors and employees. I know who is loyal to me and my father's vision, and who is already disgusted with the new leadership. We can acquire a controlling interest before my mother and sister even know what's happening. You'll get a thriving tech company for a fraction of its worth, and I'll get to save my father's life's work. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating the risk, the reward. It's a bold play, he finally said. Hostile takeovers are messy, especially when it's family. The mess has already been made, I countered. I'm just proposing a way to clean it up. The alternative is letting a great company die an ignoble death. Send me your dossier, Harrison said abruptly. Everything you have. Projections, bylaws, key personnel files. My team will do its own due diligence. If your analysis holds up, and if you're as smart as you sound, we can talk further. Don't call me again, I'll call you. The line went dead. I slumped back in my chair, my body trembling with a mixture of terror and elation. I had faced the dragon and survived the first encounter. The ball was in his court now, but I had given it my best shot. I immediately compiled all my research, my projections, and a detailed, annotated copy of the company bylaws and sent it to the encrypted email address his assistant had provided. Now, the real waiting began. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture. I knew that Harrison's due diligence would be ruthlessly thorough. His team of analysts and investigators would be picking apart every aspect of Innovate Dynamics, looking for any weakness in my story. During this time, I had to act as if nothing was happening. I had to maintain a facade of defeat. This was made easier by the fact that my mother and sister seemed to be going out of their way to rub salt in my wounds. My mother called, her voice dripping with false concern. "Liam, honey, I know you must be hurting," she began, "but I hope you can see that this is for the best. Chloe is thriving. She has so many wonderful ideas. She's redecorating the executive offices, bringing in a whole new energy." I just listened, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. Redecorating. That was her priority. I mumbled something non-committal and hung up. The call only strengthened my resolve. They were arrogant, they were careless. They believed they'd already won, which meant they weren't watching their backs. My first concrete piece of intelligence came from an unexpected source. David, one of our senior engineers, and a man who had been with my father since the garage days, reached out to me. He was fiercely loyal to my father's memory and disgusted by what he called the circus that the company had become. He became my inside man. It's worse than you can imagine, Liam. He told me over a clandestine coffee meeting far from our part of town. Chloe held an all-hands meeting. She announced that the company's new motto is work hard, play harder. She's planning to install a smoothie bar in the break room and has implemented Fun Fridays where everyone is supposed to wear a silly hat. We have a critical software patch deadline for the German automotive contract, and she's focused on silly hats. The information was infuriating, but also incredibly valuable. It was exactly the kind of mismanagement I had predicted. Chloe was treating the company like her personal sorority house. She was alienating the serious, dedicated employees and promoting people based on their sycophancy rather than their skills. David told me she had already promoted one of her marketing friends to a project manager role overseeing a team of engineers. A woman who didn't know the difference between Python and a Python. Morale was plummeting. Several key engineers were already polishing their resumes. "She's a wrecking ball," David said, his face grim. "She's undoing years of work in a matter of weeks." I asked David to discreetly keep a log of every bad decision, every ridiculous expense, every missed deadline. He agreed without hesitation. He was as invested in saving the company as I was. Each piece of information he fed me, I forwarded to Harrison's team, adding it to the growing mountain of evidence. The next blow from my family was more personal and far more cruel. My mother called again. This time, there was no pretense of concern. Her voice was cold and businesslike. "Liam, I'm calling to inform you that Chloe and I have decided to sell your father's car." I felt the air leave my lungs. My father's car was a vintage 1967 Porsche 911, a car he had lovingly restored himself over a decade. It was his pride and joy, the one luxury he had ever allowed himself. It was a part of him, a tangible piece of his soul. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to drive it, but I kept it meticulously maintained in my garage, a gleaming blue monument to the man I missed so much. "You can't," I whispered. "That car is. It's Dad's." "Don't be sentimental, Liam," she said dismissively. "It's just a thing. And frankly, the company needs a cash infusion for some of Chloe's new marketing initiatives. She thinks a big splashy campaign is just what we need. We're selling it to a private collector next week. Since it's still technically part of the estate, there's nothing you can do about it." They weren't just selling a car. They were liquidating my father's memory to fund Chloe's vanity projects. They were taking something precious and turning it into cash for smoothie bars and ad campaigns. That was the moment my fight became truly personal. It was no longer just about the company. It was about avenging the desecration of my father's memory. The day after that phone call, Arthur Harrison called me back. "My team's report is in," he said, his voice a low growl. "Your sister is even more incompetent than you described. She's a liability wrapped in an overprivileged nightmare. She's practically handing us the company on a silver platter. Your family's greed has made them sloppy. Let's make them pay for it." A wave of vindication washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. "The plan is a go, Mr. Renner," Harrison continued. "We're setting up a shell corporation. Phoenix Holdings. Poetic, don't you think? We will start acquiring shares tomorrow. Get me a list of your loyalists. We'll start with them. Quietly. No one must know you're involved. As far as the world is concerned, you are defeated. Let them believe it." Pride comes before the fall. The plan was set. The pieces were in motion. While my sister was busy picking out paint swatches for her new office, I was preparing to take back everything she had stolen from me and more. The war had begun. The 2 months that followed were the most intense and clandestine of my life. Under the banner of the newly formed Phoenix Holdings, a name that gave me a grim sense of satisfaction every time I heard it, we began our silent siege. Arthur Harrison's team was a marvel of efficiency and discretion. They were sharks who moved through the water without making a single ripple. Our strategy was twofold. First, we targeted the shares held by the small group of early employees and angel investors who I knew were loyal to my father's original vision. I provided Harrison's legal team with a carefully vetted list. I couldn't make the calls myself. My involvement had to remain a complete secret. Instead, a lawyer from Harrison's firm, a polished and persuasive man named Marcus, made the approaches. He was authorized to offer them a generous premium over the current and slightly declining market value of the shares. The narrative he presented was simple and compelling. A private investment group saw long-term potential in Innovate Dynamics' core technology, but had concerns about the new, erratic management. This was an opportunity for early stakeholders to cash out at a high point before the inevitable decline. The first to sell was a retired engineer who had been my father's first hire. He told Marcus, Richard Renner would be spinning in his grave if he saw what was happening to his company. Sell the shares. I hope you guys can fix it. One by one, they agreed. They were selling not just for the money, but out of a sense of loyalty to the past and a deep disappointment in the present. With each transaction, our ownership percentage crept up, 5%, then 10, then 12. While this was happening, my inside man, David, continued to feed me a steady stream of updates from within the belly of the beast. Chloe's reign of error was escalating. She had fired two of our most experienced and expensive senior engineers, calling them not team players when they questioned the technical feasibility of one of her half-baked ideas for a socially integrated coffee maker. She had sunk a massive portion of the budget into a flashy rebranding campaign, changing the company logo from the classic, strong design my father had sketched on a napkin to a bubbly, pink, and purple monstrosity that looked more suited to a cosmetics company. The employees hated it, the clients were confused, but Chloe and my mother were delighted, praising it as modern and fresh. My mother was completely under Chloe's spell, enabling her every whim. She saw Chloe's reckless spending as bold investment and her alienation of key staff as trimming the fat. They were living in a delusion, convinced of their own genius. Their arrogance was our greatest asset. They were so focused on the superficial trappings of power, on redecorating offices and planning fun Fridays, that they were completely oblivious to the real power shift happening silently in the shareholder ledgers. The second part of our strategy was to purchase shares on the open market. Harrison's traders were masters at this, buying small, irregular blocks of stock through different brokers to avoid triggering any alarms or causing a spike in the price. And as Chloe's mismanagement continued, the company's financials began to reflect it. A key client, frustrated with missed deadlines and chaotic communication, put a major project on hold. The news caused a slight dip in the stock price. We bought more. A quarterly report showed a significant increase in operational expenses and a slowdown in RD progress. The stock dipped again. We bought more. It was the ultimate irony. Every incompetent decision Chloe made, every dollar she wasted, made it cheaper for us to buy the company she was so proud of running. She was, in effect, financing her own demise. During this time, I had to maintain absolute radio silence. I saw my mother and Chloe at a family acquaintance's funeral. It was the first time I'd seen them in person since my ousting. They approached me, their faces a mixture of pity and condescension. Liam, my mother said, placing a cold hand on my arm, I'm so sorry we have to see each other under these circumstances. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said, my voice flat and neutral. Good, good, she said, though she clearly didn't care. Chloe is doing such a wonderful job. It's been a difficult transition, of course, but she's a natural leader. Your father would be so proud. The new logo is amazing, isn't it? Chloe added, her eyes gleaming. It's really connecting with a younger demographic. I just nodded, a silent, hollow gesture. Inside, a cold fire was raging. They were standing there, lying to my face, desecrating my father's memory with every breath, and I had to just stand there and take it. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But I held on to the image of Arthur Harrison's face, the thought of our plan. My silence was a weapon. My apparent defeat was my camouflage. The tipping point came sooner than we expected. One of the original angel investors, a man who held a crucial 7% stake in the company, had been on an extended trip abroad and was out of the loop. When he returned, he was appalled by what he found. He called me directly furious. Liam, what in God's name has happened to your company? I just had a call with your sister. She tried to explain our Q4 strategy to me, and I think she believes synergy is a type of renewable energy. She's going to bankrupt you. This was my chance. I couldn't reveal my plan, but I could guide him. I was voted out, Michael, I said, letting the weariness and defeat seep into my voice. My mother and sister are in control now. My hands are tied. This is unacceptable, he fumed. Richard's legacy. I'm selling my shares. I want no part of this train wreck. Who are you selling to? I asked, my heart pounding. I don't know. I'll put them on the market. Cut my losses. Before you do that, I said, my voice low and urgent. I've heard rumors that a private equity group called Phoenix Holdings has been sniffing around. They're making strong offers. You might want to reach out to them. You'll get a better price than you will in the open market. I gave him the contact information for Harrison's lawyer, Marcus. Michael called them that same day. Within 48 hours, the deal was done. His 7% stake, combined with what we had already accumulated, pushed us over the edge. We had 51%. We had control. I got the call from Harrison himself. We have it, he said, his voice holding a rare note of satisfaction. Congratulations, Mr. Renner. You just bought your company back. Now, what's your first move? My first move, I said, looking at a picture of my father on my desk, is to schedule a board meeting. The call from my lawyer to the board of Innovate Dynamics was, by all accounts, a bombshell. He didn't announce who the new majority shareholder was. He simply stated, with cold legal formality, that a controlling interest in the company had been acquired by a new entity, Phoenix Holdings. He informed them that, as per the company bylaws, the new ownership was calling an emergency board meeting in 2 days' time to discuss the composition of the board and the future of the company's executive leadership. Panic! That was the first word David used to describe the reaction inside the office. The news spread like wildfire. Who was Phoenix Holdings? What did they want? Chloe, he told me, was completely blindsided. She went from arrogant self-assurance to terrified paranoia in the space of an hour. She apparently stormed through the office, demanding to know who was behind this, accusing corporate rivals of launching a hostile takeover. It never once occurred to her that the threat could be coming from someone she had already dismissed and discarded. My mother was equally panicked. She called me, her voice shrill with anxiety. Liam, have you heard? Some horrible vulture fund has bought up shares. They're trying to take the company from us. After all our hard work, you have to help us. You understand this world. What do we do? The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. She was asking me, the son she had betrayed and cast out, to save her from the consequences of her own actions. I played my part one last time. I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice a carefully crafted monotone of indifference. I'm not involved with the company anymore, remember? You and Chloe are in charge. I'm sure you'll handle it. I could hear the frustration and fear in her silence before she hung up. They were alone. They were exposed. And they had no idea what was coming. The day of the board meeting, I put on the same suit I had worn the day they fired me. It felt different this time. It wasn't armor for a man on the defensive. It was the uniform of a general about to claim his victory. I drove to the office building, the same building I hadn't set foot in for months. As I walked through the lobby, I saw the changes Chloe had made. The sleek, professional decor was gone, replaced by pastel-colored walls and inspirational posters with generic slogans like, Dream Big! The reception desk had a bowl of free candy. It looked like a kindergarten. I rode the elevator up to the executive floor. As the doors opened, I saw David standing there, pretending to be waiting for the elevator himself. He gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of our shared victory. I walked down the hall to the boardroom. The door was closed. I could hear the muffled, anxious voices from within. I paused outside, took a deep breath, and centered myself. I was not the broken man who had been escorted out of this building. I was the storm they never saw coming. I opened the door and walked in. The conversation stopped instantly. All heads snapped towards me. The faces of the board members, my mother, Chloe, George, and Sarah, wear a perfect portrait of stunned disbelief. Chloe's jaw literally dropped. Her face, which had been pinched with anxiety, went slack with utter shock. My mother's face went pale, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into dawning horror. George and Sarah just stared, looking like they had seen a ghost. I said nothing. I walked calmly to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one my mother had so arrogantly occupied during my termination, and sat down. Beside me sat Arthur Harrison's lawyer, Marcus, his briefcase open, a stack of documents neatly arranged in front of him. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, my mother found her voice. Liam, what are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting. Not anymore, I said, my voice calm and even. Marcus cleared his throat. Allow me to clarify, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. As we notified you 2 days ago, a controlling interest of 51% of Innovate Dynamics has been acquired by my client, Phoenix Holdings. As the representative of the majority shareholder, I am here to chair this meeting, and with me is the sole director of Phoenix Holdings, its owner and CEO, Mr. Liam Renner. The full weight of his words descended on the room. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was me. I was the vulture fund. I was the enemy at the gates. Chloe made a choked, sputtering sound. No, that's not possible. You're lying. He's nobody. He has nothing. On the contrary, Marcus said, sliding a thick document across the table. Here are the signed shareholder agreements and the final transfer of ownership papers. It's all perfectly legal. Liam Renner owns this company, which means he owns you. Chloe's face, the same face that had laughed at me in the lobby, was now a mask of ugly, contorted rage and disbelief. My mother looked like she was going to faint. She stared at me, her eyes pleading, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a nightmare. She found none. My face was a placid mask of cold, hard justice. The climax of my return was not a shouting match, but a quiet, methodical execution. I let the reality of the situation sink in, savoring the silent chaos that was erupting in their minds. Chloe was the first to break the stunned silence, her voice a shrill cry of denial. You can't do this! This is our company! Dad left it to us! Dad left this company to me! I corrected her, my voice low and dangerously quiet. He entrusted me with his legacy, a legacy you and Mom spat on the moment you thought you could get away with it. You didn't see a legacy, Chloe. You saw a piggy bank, a social club, a stage for your pathetic ego. I turned my gaze to my mother. She flinched as if struck. And you? I said, the pain of her betrayal sharpening my words. You stood by and let it happen. No, you orchestrated it. You took his memory, his principles of integrity and family, and you twisted them into weapons to use against your own son. You told me I wasn't fit to lead. You were wrong. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished table. For 2 months, I have watched from the outside as you have systematically dismantled everything my father and I built. David, I said, nodding towards the door. David entered, holding a tablet. If you would, please. On the large screen at the end of the boardroom, a presentation appeared. It was David's log, page after page of Chloe's incompetence, displayed for all to see. The budget for the office redecoration, the invoices for the smoothie bar, the cancellation notice from the key client, a list of the talented engineers who had resigned in the last 6 weeks, a side-by-side comparison of the stock price on the day I was fired and its value today. It was a meticulous, undeniable record of her failure. Chloe's face went from white to crimson. Those are lies! It's taken out of context! Are they? I asked, my voice like ice. Is it a lie that you spent $250,000 on a rebranding campaign while our top RD project was stalled for lack of funding? Is it a lie that you fired our 2 best coders because they told you your idea for a smart toaster was moronic? Is it a lie that your leadership has cost this company nearly 20% of its market value in just over 60 days? I didn't need to wait for an answer. I looked directly at Chloe, the smug, laughing girl in the lobby, now a cowering, exposed fraud. You stood in the lobby of this building, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, ensuring everyone had to lean in to hear. And you laughed at me. You told me, I'm the VP now, you're nothing. Well, look at me now, Chloe. I own the company. I own the chair you're sitting in. I own your title. And as my first official act as the new majority shareholder and CEO of Innovate Dynamics, I paused, letting the moment hang, letting her feel the full weight of her downfall. You're fired. Get your things. Security will escort you out. The words hit her like a physical blow. All the fight went out of her. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. She looked at our mother for help, but our mother was just staring at her hands on the table, her face a gray mask of shame and defeat. Then, I turned to George and Sarah. As for the rest of this board, I find your judgment questionable and your loyalty non-existent. My father trusted you. You failed him. I am calling for your immediate resignations. Marcus slid 2 pre-written resignation letters across the table towards them. They looked at each other, then at me. There was no fight in them either. They knew they were beaten. They quietly signed the letters. Finally, I looked at my mother. She was the only one left. She wouldn't be fired by me. She would be rendered utterly powerless. Your shares are now a minority stake, I told her, my voice devoid of emotion. You will have no say in the operations of this company. You will not sit on this board. You will receive your dividend checks, and that is the only connection you will have to Innovate Dynamics from this day forward. You made your choice when you chose her over me, when you chose greed over integrity. Now you can live with it. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, the end of their era. Security will now help Miss Renner collect her personal items, I said to the room at large. Welcome back to Innovate Dynamics. As I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them to the wreckage of their own making, I didn't feel the elation I expected. I felt a quiet, profound sense of rightness. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered. The fallout from the boardroom coup was immediate and absolute. As Chloe was being escorted out of the building, carrying her own cardboard box, a piece of poetic justice that was not lost on me, me mother tried to corner me in the hallway. Her face was a wreck, streaked with tears, her composure shattered. "Liam, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. I was wrong. I was just trying to look out for your sister. I thought I was doing what was best for the family." The word family was like acid on my tongue. "You destroyed our family, Mom," I said, pulling my arm away from her grasp. "You did that the moment you decided to betray me. You didn't do it for Chloe, not really. You did it for your own sense of power. You enjoyed it. Now it's over." I walked away without looking back. There was nothing more to say. Severing that tie, the final frayed thread of my old life, was a clean cut. It hurt, but it was necessary. My first order of business as the rightful CEO was to stabilize the ship. I immediately called an all-hands meeting. The employees gathered in the main atrium, their faces a mixture of confusion, anxiety, and hope. They had just seen Chloe escorted out and had heard the rumors flying around. When I walked up to the podium, a spontaneous applause broke out. It started with a few engineers in the front and quickly spread through the entire room. It was a genuine, heartfelt welcome back, and it moved me more than I can say. "Welcome back to the real Innovate Dynamics," I began, my voice thick with emotion but steady. "The company that my father, Richard Renner, founded on the principles of integrity, innovation, and respect. I know the last couple of months have been chaotic. I know some of you have been frustrated and some of you have left. I want to assure you right now that the circus is over. I laid out my immediate plan, a complete halt to all of Chloe's vanity projects, a renewed and aggressive investment in our core RD, and a full review of all the personnel changes she had made. The smoothie bar is gone by Friday," I said, which got a laugh and another round of applause. "We are going back to basics. We are going to focus on what we do best, building incredible technology and taking care of our clients and our people. To prove I was serious, I made my first big announcement. I am promoting David Fowler to the position of Chief Operating Officer," I said, calling a shocked David up to the stage. This man's loyalty to this company and to my father's vision never wavered. He is the kind of leader we need. The message was clear. Loyalty and competence would once again be the currency of this company, not nepotism or sycophancy. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. It was a cleanup operation on a massive scale. We had to renegotiate with the client Chloe had alienated, assuring them that the company was back under stable leadership. I personally flew to Germany to meet with them, and after a long and humbling meeting, they agreed to restart the contract. We had to rehire the talented engineers who had quit, a task made easier by the news of my return. Most of them came back immediately, eager to work in a sane environment again. We tore down the ridiculous pink and purple logos and restored my father's classic, respectable branding. Piece by piece, I was undoing the damage, erasing the stain of my sister's brief, disastrous reign. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying work. Every problem I solved, every piece of the company I restored, felt like I was healing a piece of myself. I was reclaiming not just my company, but my purpose. About a month after my return, a package arrived at my office. It was from the private collector who had bought my father's Porsche. Inside was a note and a set of keys. The note was from Arthur Harrison. It simply said, "A victory lap is in order. Consider it a bonus." I went down to the executive parking garage, and there it was. The gleaming blue 1967 Porsche 911. My father's car. Harrison had found the collector and bought it back for me. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the hood, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I let myself cry. They were not tears of grief or anger, but tears of overwhelming gratitude and release. I had saved the company. I had protected the legacy. I had brought my father's car home. My healing wasn't just about professional vindication. It was about reclaiming the pieces of my life that they had tried to take from me. I sold my large, empty house and bought a loft apartment downtown, closer to the office, a space that was mine and held no ghosts of the past. I poured my energy into my work, but this time it was different. It wasn't fueled by grief or a desperate need to prove myself. It was fueled by a quiet, confident passion. The company thrived like never before. With David as my COO and our motivated team back in place, we became more innovative, more efficient, and more profitable than ever. We were not just honoring my father's legacy, we were building upon it, taking it to new heights he could only have dreamed of. One day a letter arrived, forwarded from my old address. It was from Chloe. It was not an apology. It was a long, rambling screed of self-pity and blame. She accused me of being cruel, of stealing her dream, of never giving her a chance. She blamed me for her inability to find a new job, for the fact that my mother now barely spoke to her, lost in her own shame. According to Chloe, none of what had happened was her fault. It was all because I was jealous and vindictive. I read the letter and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even a flicker of the old familial bond. The person who wrote that letter was a stranger to me. A ghost from a life I no longer lived. I tore it up and threw it in the trash without a second thought. I had moved on. My victory wasn't in her misery, but in my own success and peace of mind. I had learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be your greatest allies are your most dangerous enemies, and true family is not about blood, but about loyalty, respect, and shared values. I had found my true family in the dedicated employees of Innovate Dynamics, in allies like David, and even in a shrewd old shark like Arthur Harrison. So here I am, in the office that is truly mine, looking out at a city full of possibility. My father's car is in the garage, a symbol of a past I cherish and a future I built myself. The company is stronger than ever, a testament to the fact that integrity is and always will be the most valuable asset. They tried to reduce me to nothing, but they only succeeded in showing me what I was truly made of. My name is Liam Renner, and I am the master of my own destiny. To anyone out there who has been betrayed, who has been cast down and told they are nothing, let my story be your proof. The best revenge is not revenge at all. It's building a life so successful and so full of purpose that your betrayers become a forgotten footnote in your own triumphant story. Thank you for listening.